Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I'm so happy I finally get to share a story. I was actually kinda giddy with excitement when this happened because I read stories here all the time. Just to give a little context, I live in Japan and I am Japanese born but went to university and law school in the States, so I'm fluent in both Japanese and English. After graduating with my law degree, I decided to move back to Tokyo to work at an international firm where I could use both languages. The hours are brutal, but the pay is good, and I get to help bridge cultural gaps between Japanese and American businesses. This one day, I had three friends from law school visiting Japan for the first time. We had all been close during our legal writing study group, and they'd finally saved enough to make the trip they'd been promising to take since graduation. I'd taken a half day off work to show them around Tokyo, helping them navigate the subway system and acting as their translator while they shopped. We were in a massive electronics department store in Akihabara, and my friends needed help figuring out the differences between Japanese and American electronics. I had just come from work, so I was wearing my charcoal gray suit with a blue tie, looking very much like the attorney I am. After about 20 minutes of helping my friends understand the voltage differences and region locking on various gadgets, two large American men walked up to us with annoyed expressions on their faces. The first American rudely asked if I was going to help only the girls the whole time, pointing out that other customers needed help with English too. Now, at this moment, I must have had the biggest smile on my face, as I always hoped I would encounter a situation like this. But I honestly couldn't imagine how insane this would be. Typically, I love helping foreigners because I know how hard it is being in Japan without knowing Japanese, and I've made a few cool friends from helping them in shops and restaurants. But these two were so entitled, and I was with my friends, so I was just gonna tell him I don't work here and excuse myself. I started to apologize and explain that I didn't work there, but he cut me off mid-sentence. The first American sarcastically said I better be sorry, then demanded to know if a Nintendo Switch game was tax-free and would work in America. I tried again to tell him I had no idea because I didn't work there, but he interrupted me once more. The first American rudely ordered me to go check, complained about Japanese service, and compared the store to Walmart. At this point, I'm getting pretty pissed, because he's now not only acting like a jerk, he's insulting my culture. Meanwhile, my friends are laughing their butts off, as they browse Reddit as well. If you're reading this, hey. So finally, I go and look at the game, read the back, and tell him. I told him they sell the same game in America, and suggested he buy it there or ask an actual employee. The first American responded with insults, asking if I was R-worded, and again comparing the store to Walmart. I'll be honest, I let my anger get the best of me here. I told him to get lost and called him a jerk. As expected, this infuriates this guy, and he pushes me. The first American shouted at me, demanding to know what I had said to him. At this point, I'm about to punch this fat jerk in the face, but a manager comes by. He asks, in Japanese, what is going on? The manager politely asked in Japanese what was happening. I explained the situation in Japanese. I explained to the manager that this person had pushed me for no reason. The first American told me to translate what he was saying, while the manager decided to call the police. The first American demanded that I translate what he was saying, insisting he was a customer. I told him that the manager was calling the police because of what happened. The first American sarcastically replied that maybe then he could finally get some help. In my head, I'm thinking, sure, you speak no Japanese, like they're gonna help you. About 10 minutes later, two police officers show up and begin asking questions. They speak to me in Japanese, and I explain what happened. They then turn to the Americans. The police officer asked in Japanese for them to show their passports. The Americans looked confused. The second American asked what the officer was saying. I translated that he was asking for their passports. The two Americans looked at each other nervously. The first American admitted they didn't have their passports with them and explained they were at their hotel. When I translate this to the police, their expressions immediately change. This is a big problem in Japan. where foreigners are required by law to carry their passports at all times. The police officer asked in Japanese where their hotel was located. I translated the question, asking where they were staying. The first American explained they were staying in Narita and mentioned they had reservations at the Robot restaurant in a couple hours. When I translate this, the police officers exchange a look. Narita is about 2 hours away from central Tokyo. The police officer explained in Japanese that they would have to go with the Americans to their hotel to verify their passports. I translated for the Americans, telling them the officers needed to escort them back to their hotel to check their passports. The first American reacted with shock and complained about having paid 8,000 yen for Robot restaurant tickets. The second American pleaded to go tomorrow instead, promising to bring their passports then. When I translated their protests, the police officers shake their heads. The police officers simply stated, "It was a law." The police ask if I want to file a report about being pushed, but I decline. It's satisfying enough to watch as they escort the two Americans out of the store and into their police car for the 2-hour drive back to Narita. The last thing I hear as they're leaving, the first American cursed loudly, complaining that they would miss their show. I mockingly wished them a nice trip back to Narita. My friends and I burst into laughter once they're gone. We spent the rest of the afternoon shopping peacefully, and later we went to a local izakaya where I told all my Japanese friends about the entitled Americans who thought I worked at the electronics store. Everyone had a good laugh, and I finally had my own story to share on Reddit. I later found out from a friend who works at the Robot restaurant that they have a strict no-refund policy for missed shows. I learned early on that sometimes keeping quiet is the best way to stay out of trouble. Growing up with 3 older brothers meant I mastered the art of picking my battles. But every now and then life hands you a situation so absurd, so dripping with entitlement, that staying silent just isn't an option. My girlfriend and I had been dating for just about 3 months when we decided to take our first international trip together. A week in the United States seemed like the perfect test for our new relationship. Little did I know the real test would come before we even boarded the plane. Our flight from London was delayed due to some nasty weather. The departure board kept pushing our takeoff time further and further back, and like everyone else stuck in the airport, we headed to the bar to wait it out. The place was packed with irritated travelers. After queuing for forever, we finally scored our drinks and, by some miracle, found a tiny table away from the worst of the crowd. As we squeezed through the masses, I noticed a red-faced man with a beer belly the size of a beach ball loudly complaining to anyone who would listen. His wife stood beside him. I was dressed in a dark blue jacket, light blue shirt, and black pants. Nothing like the bar staff who wore black polos with bright yellow trim and logos. We had barely settled at our table when disaster struck. My girlfriend warned me to be careful with my elbow, but it was too late. My drink toppled over, creating a small beer lake across our table. I grabbed the napkins and attempted damage control, but they were about as absorbent as plastic wrap. I suggested that we should just leave since nobody had noticed the spill. My girlfriend disagreed and insisted that I go to the bar to ask for a cloth. I reluctantly agreed. I trudged to the bar, got a proper cloth, and returned to clean up my mess. That's when I felt a heavy tap on my arm. Mr. Redface had found me. Redface asked me why it was taking so long to get served. I looked up from my cleaning, confused about why he was asking me this. I explained that the bar was busier than usual, probably because of all the extra people due to the flight delays. This seemingly innocent observation triggered something in him. His face darkened to a shade of crimson I didn't think was humanly possible. He angrily said all the more reason there should be all hands to the pumps behind the bar. I stared at him puzzled and said I supposed he was right. He demanded to know what I was going to do about it. I asked him what he meant, which only made him angrier. That's when he exploded. Spittle flew from his mouth as he ranted about how I should be behind the bar serving drinks, instead of wasting time cleaning tables. It finally dawned on me. This man thought I worked there. I tried to explain that I didn't work at the bar and was just a customer, but he cut me off mid-sentence by grabbing my wrist, the one holding the cloth. I immediately tensed and told him to let go of me. My girlfriend quickly stood up and moved to my side, wrapping her hands around my free arm. She tried to clarify to the man that I didn't work there. He rudely told her to mind her own business. That comment hit a nerve. I noticed his wife pushing through the crowd toward us looking like she was ready to join the fight. Great. Tag team wrestling at the airport bar. I reacted instinctively. Using both hands, I locked onto his wrist, pulled him toward me, and when he inevitably resisted, I switched to pushing. He tumbled backward into nearby furniture, collapsing with all the grace of a falling tree. His wife tried to help him up, but ended up falling on top of him instead. They flopped around like fish on land, while my girlfriend gripped my arm tightly and very clearly instructed me not to hit him. We started making our way out of the bar, my girlfriend leading. Behind us, Redface had untangled himself from his wife and furniture and was charging after us. He swung a fist at me, a slow drunken haymaker that a sleepwalker could have dodged. I leaned back slightly and his momentum carried him forward until he lost balance and crashed to the floor again. When he stood up, I lost it, laughing at his now two-toned blue shirt, darkened with spilled beer from his fall. This laughter was apparently the final straw. He charged at me like an enraged bull. I sidestepped and gave him a small push that sent him stumbling past me. When he turned around for another attempt, his face changed. He'd noticed the police officers who had just entered the bar. His wife immediately pointed at me and accused me of assaulting them, demanding that they arrest me. I looked around for support from the crowd, but everyone was either filming the scene or gossiping. No heroes today. The police separated us. One officer interviewed Redface and his wife, while another talked to me and my girlfriend. A third officer approached after watching the security footage and spoke to his colleagues. The officer told me that they had reviewed the CCTV footage and determined I wasn't at fault. He asked if I wanted to come with them to make a statement. After discussing how long it would take, I decided I didn't want to risk missing our flight. I took the officer's card instead. Behind us, Redface and his wife started screaming. From their reaction, I guessed they'd been told about the video evidence. When they wouldn't calm down, the officers handcuffed Redface and led him away. The officer explained that the man was being arrested and would be taken to the airport police station, possibly the main station if he needed to be detained. He added that the man wouldn't be flying that day, his bags would be removed from the flight. 2 weeks later, after returning to Britain, I called the officer as promised. Redface had been transferred to the main police station until he sobered up. With one previous assault conviction from years earlier, he received a formal caution, no punishment, but a mark on his record for any future incidents. Back on our flight day, my girlfriend praised me for staying calm and not hitting the man. She mentioned that I deserved a reward for my good behavior. I playfully suggested that perhaps we could join the Mile High Club by finding some privacy on the plane. My girlfriend rejected my suggestion and told me to get lost. Some rewards are apparently off the table, even for good behavior. Let me explain how things worked at my high school. We had this system where if you were late, you had to go to the secretariat to get a stamp, collect 3 stamps, and boom, detention. The morning routine was structured around 2 bell signals. At the first bell, everyone had to start forming rows based on their first class. If you weren't in line by the second bell, which rang 2 minutes later, you were officially late. The problem was that some teachers didn't wait for that second bell. They just gathered their students and hit the class immediately after the first one. I often found myself arriving between these 2 bells, technically on time according to school rules, but late according to certain teachers. This one teacher, who I'll call Miss Strict, was the worst offender. She seemed to take personal offense whenever I'd rush in after the first bell, but before the second. One Monday morning, I was running slightly behind schedule. I stayed up late finishing an assignment for another class and overslept a bit. As I pulled into the school parking lot, I heard the first bell ring. I spotted Miss Strict already gathering my class into a line, preparing to march everyone to the classroom. I sprinted across the yard and quietly slipped into the back of the line thinking I'd made it. But Miss Strict had eagle eyes. She immediately spotted me and yelled that I was late again and needed to go get my stamp. When I tried to protest that the second bell hadn't even rung yet, she cut me off saying she didn't care and that I wasn't there when she gathered the class, so I needed to get my stamp now. I looked at her, then at my classmates who were avoiding eye contact, clearly not wanting to get involved. In that moment, something snapped inside me. If I was going to be punished for being late when I wasn't actually late according to school rules, why bother rushing to class at all? So instead of heading to the secretariat, I turned around, walked back to the bike rack, and pedaled away from school. There was a small bakery about 5 minutes from campus that made amazing croissants. I figured if I was already late, I might as well make it worth my while. I bought a large bag of croissants, enough for the entire class, and then went home for a bit. I timed my return carefully, making sure to arrive at school with about 5 minutes left in the first period. When I got to the secretariat, the administrator looked at me with his usual disapproving stare. He warned me that I was cutting it close and that 5 more minutes would have meant 2 stamps. I brushed it off, saying it wasn't like I planned it or anything. After getting my stamp, I walked to Miss Strick's classroom with my bag of croissants. I knocked on the door and entered with the biggest smile I could muster, holding up the paper bag. Miss Strick's face went from surprise to confusion to anger in about 3 seconds flat. She demanded to know what I was doing, saying she had seen me arrive at school that morning and questioning why I wasn't in her class. I set the bag on her desk and replied with complete calmness. I explained that since she told me I was late and needed to get a stamp, and since I was already going to be marked late, I didn't see the point in hurrying to catch what little of her class I could. I mentioned I was also hungry since I had skipped breakfast trying to be on time, so I decided to get some croissants in the meantime. I opened the bag, and the smell of fresh-baked pastries filled the room. I assured her I had bought enough for everyone, not just myself. The class erupted in whispers and a few stifled laughs. Miss Strict was fuming, her face turning redder by the second. She told me my behavior was completely unacceptable and that I couldn't just leave school premises. She threatened to report me to the principal. I shrugged and started handing out croissants to my classmates, who accepted them with varying degrees of amusement and incredulity. I offered one to Miss Strict, but she refused. Just then the bell rang, signaling the end of first period. We all gathered our things and filed out of the classroom, many of my classmates giving me approving nods or pats on the back as they munched on their unexpected treats. Later that day, one of the guys from the secretariat pulled me aside. He said we needed to talk about the croissant incident. I explained my frustration with getting stamps for barely being late, especially when I arrived between the 2 bell signals. He said he understood my frustration but explained that they couldn't allow students to leave school premises to buy croissants because it was an insurance liability. I challenged him, asking if it was okay for teachers to ignore the second bell rule, but not okay for me to respond to that unfairness. He conceded a bit, saying he would have a word with the teachers about following the proper bell schedule, but asked me not to pull something like this again. I agreed, and surprisingly, that was the end of it. No detention, no call to my parents, nothing beyond that conversation. The next time I joined our row between bell signals, Miss Strict didn't send me for a stamp. In fact, she never did again. I moved to South Korea to teach English at an after-school academy 3 years ago. Everything started well until management implemented a strict efficiency system. We had to clock in an hour before classes or face penalties. 5 minutes late meant fines. 15 minutes meant losing a day's pay. This felt ridiculous since we just sit around doing nothing for 45 minutes. At a staff meeting, I questioned if we'd get paid extra for staying late, as we often did when helping students or talking with parents. Management dismissed this, calling it part of being dedicated teachers. The response was immediate. At exactly 8 p.m., everyone began shutting down mid-task. Parents got cut off mid-conversation, students were handed to managers, and complaints flooded in. Then I had a realization. I could sign in remotely on my phone while getting breakfast and arrive just 15 minutes before class. Plenty of time to prepare. Soon, half the staff was doing this. When management noticed, they confronted me about signing in at 8 but arriving at 8:47. I pointed out that I followed their policy, the system showed I was present. After weeks of back and forth, they scrapped the sign-in system. Their next mistake was forcing us to place students in advanced classes despite failing placement tests because the customer is always right. The predictable happened, students struggled, lost interest, and scores declined. Parents began complaining about lack of progress. Management blamed our teaching methods, but we had documentation of our original placement recommendations that they'd overruled. Eventually, management backed down and made teacher assessments final. We lost some immediate sales, but our retention improved dramatically as students were placed in classes where they could succeed. I stayed 2 more years, having learned that good teachers know what works. Rules should support education, not hinder it. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.